Harlan stepped into the fluorescent glare of a fast food shop, his coat frayed at the seams, shoes carrying the weight of decades. He moved with a silence that drew no eyes, as if he were already invisible. At the counter, he spoke low, steady, small fries. Elwood, the cashier, tilted his head, sneer curling. "Just small fries. People like you waste my time." His words cut sharper than the buzz of the fryer. Harlan slid $100 bill across the metal surface. The note trembled under the cold light, mocked for its size, not its value. A woman behind him. Lurleen snickered, voice thin as glass. "Old man probably can't even finish a burger." No reply. He bowed his head, took the tray, one lonely box of fries, pale against the paper. A fortune in his pocket, yet stripped bare by a handful of salt and starch. He remembered the years when hunger clung like a shadow. Shoes split at the heel soles, flapping on wet streets, the cold biting through thin socks. Each step was a confession of poverty, each glance from strangers a verdict. He had stood in line for cheap bread, hearing whispers behind his back, laughter sharp and merciless. Look at him, barely holding together. The humiliation was not in the hunger itself, but in the eyes that measured him, weighing his worth against the holes in his jacket. That gaze followed him home into nights where silence pressed harder than the hunger pangs. Harlan had promised himself then he would rise. He would own more than bread, more than broken shoes. Yet the scars of those moments never faded. They remained carved inside him, an echo he carried into boardrooms and high-rise offices. And now, in that greasy shop with fries cooling under harsh lights, the echo returned. The sneer of Elwood was not new. It was an old ghost walking back into his life. He was no longer the boy mocked for torn laces. He was Harlan, a name whispered in investment circles, a man whose single signature could move empires. Behind locked doors, contracts worth hundreds of millions waited for his approval. $250 million poised on the edge of his pen, ready to flood into a brand desperate for survival. But he withheld his hand. Numbers never impressed him anymore. Reports lay stacked like empty shells. What mattered was the truth that never fit into a spreadsheet, the way workers breathed, the way managers ruled, the way dignity was either crushed or protected. Harlan had learned wealth grants silence, but silence is not safety. To see clearly, he had to step down into the grime, the grease, the contempt that money could never buy away. That was why he stood among fryers and soda machines unseen, waiting to measure worth not in profits, but in how people treated a stranger. The mirror reflected a stranger. Harlan drew a rough comb through thinning hair, adjusted the cheap wig with stiff fingers. Glasses smudged and scratched hid the sharpness of his eyes. A coat, its fabric tired and sagging at the seams, weighed down his shoulders. He leaned closer, watching the transformation. The billionaire vanished. In his place stood an anonymous man, lined face gray at the edges, someone who would blend into the background, overlooked, dismissed. Exactly what he needed. The glass was fogged, clouding his image like a warning. In that distortion he saw both the truth and the lie. A titan of finance reduced by choice to a figure that drew no respect. Power hidden inside weakness, wealth cloaked in rags. He fastened the buttons, feeling the fabric pinch. The disguise was more than cloth, it was armor of invisibility. Soon he would step outside, walk through doors where no one bowed, and let their unfiltered cruelty speak louder than any report. Harlan remembered the deal that had almost destroyed him. Years ago, he had trusted the neat rows of numbers, the glossy reports filled with promises of growth. They spoke of profits rising like a tide of markets expanding without limit. He had believed them, but behind the columns of ink lay rot. Workers, unpaid managers, corrupt, the culture poisoned long before his pen touched the contract. When the truth surfaced, it was too late. The collapse was swift, merciless. Millions lost, reputations burned. He had carried the weight of that mistake longer than any ledger could record. Now he refused to be blind again. He would not surrender to polished words or immaculate spreadsheets. Truth was not ink on a page. It was sweat on brows, the tremor in a tired voice, the way dignity either broke or endured. This time he would see with his own eyes. Because truth is often crueler than any number can confess. He stepped into a warehouse lined with boxes, each stuffed with files stacked like bricks of silence. The air was heavy with dust, The scent of paper aged into brittleness. He ran his hand across a ledger, feeling the dryness of pages that pretended to hold truth. Charts and graphs stared back at him, confident, clean, persuasive. They claimed stability, progress, flawless order. Yet he knew these pages lied with the calm of saints. Ink cannot bleed the misery of a worker. A table of figures cannot testify to humiliation. Paper never tells the truth, Harlan murmured. He had repeated this to himself for years, a mantra carved into his memory. These documents were monuments of half-truth structures built to comfort investors and bury the cries beneath numbers. And so he closed the folder. His verdict was clear. If he wanted to know, he must stand where the workers stood, where contempt was unmasked and masks could not hold. Harlan sat alone, the warehouse door shut behind him. Shadows stretched long across the floor, covering the files, the numbers, the comfortable lies. He whispered not to the room, but to himself. No more figures. No more polished speeches. I will look into their eyes. I will weigh them not by profits, but by the way they treat the powerless. Character is worth more than any margin. It was not just an oath. It was a line drawn in stone. He would gamble nothing on numbers again. He would gamble only on human decency. The world outside glittered with towers of glass and steel, but beneath, in kitchens and back rooms, the truth of a company was written in gestures, in words that cut or healed. That was the ledger he would read. And when his decision came, it would not crown the rich, but the righteous. Harlan stepped out into the night. The city blazed above him, towers of steel and glass scattering neon light like broken stars. Yet in that brilliance his figure was swallowed a shadow among shadows. His coat hung heavy, the disguise complete, but what weighed more was solitude. People passed without pause. Their faces were lit by phones washed in the blue glow of convenience. No one looked at him. That was the point. He was a ghost, walking in the open, a man unseen, moving toward a truth most chose to ignore. The glow of advertisements promised joy flavor, happiness in paper cups. But Harlan saw only silence and indifference beneath it all. For him, the lights were cold, merciless, like neon veins running through a city that forgot how to feel. He walked on a lone silhouette carved against the radiance. The man with millions in his hand now wandered nameless, swallowed by brightness that only deepened the darkness within. The fast food counter gleamed again, trays lined in mechanical rhythm. Elwood was at his post, unchanged, unrepentant. Harlan watched from the side as another customer approached, polite, ordering nothing more than a sandwich. Elwood sighed loudly, eyes rolling, then slammed the tray onto the counter. Food scattered against the paper grease, sliding toward the edge. The customer froze, lips pressed tight before retreating without protest. Harlan felt the weight of it, not just the slam, but the contempt behind it. Elwood's face carried the same smirk as before, the same dismissal of anyone who dared to want less than his time. The sound of the tray echoed louder in Harlan's mind than any voice could. It was the sound of arrogance made flesh, the strike of disdain against dignity. He remembered his vow. Truth was found here in the violence of small gestures. And still something worse was waiting. Amid the clatter and noise, another scene unfolded. A frail man, his hands trembling as he counted coins, struggled at the counter. The line behind him groaned with impatience. Elwood's lips parted ready with another lash of sarcasm. But before it fell, Marvella stepped forward. She offered a smile, soft, unforced, as if carved from a gentler world. She spoke quietly to the old man, helped him place his order, slipped a few coins of her own into the till without a word. The man's eyes lifted, bewildered, then softened with relief. Around them, the irritation of others faded into silence, eclipsed by a single human gesture. Harlan watched the bitterness of Elwood's tray slam still burning in him. Yet here, in Marvella's small defiance of cruelty, something shifted. A light broke through the grease and indifference, a reminder that not every corner was rotten. In the darkness of contempt, a smile could still wound it. Harlan found a quiet corner where trays piled high, and there he met Thad. The man's eyes were sunken, his uniform worn thin, but his hands never stopped moving, wiping, stacking, carrying. In a pause between tasks, words slipped out like confession. "I work nights, too," Thad said almost to himself. "2 jobs, still not enough. Rent eats half daycare, takes the rest. I've got 2 kids, both growing fast. They ask for little, and still, I can't give it." Harlan listened. Each word landed heavy more than figures in any report could weigh. Thad smiled faintly, though it cracked under fatigue. "The paycheck doesn't cover life," he added, "just survival. And even survival feels borrowed." The man straightened when the manager's voice called, hurried back to his station. His back bent low, yet it wasn't only the trays he carried, it was debt hunger, children's questions unanswered. Harlan felt the climb of emotions inside him, pity, anger, resolve, each step heavier than the last. The air shifted when Joran entered. His steps were loud, his presence colder than the neon lights. He spotted a young worker fumbling with orders, dropping a wrapper onto the floor. The boy bent to pick it up, face red. "You useless piece of trash!" Joran's voice cracked across the shop, slicing through the chatter. Heads turned. The insult echoed, brutal and unrelenting. The worker froze, shoulders hunched, shame staining his skin like ink. No one intervened. The room swallowed the cruelty in silence, as if it were routine, as if this kind of violence was a part of the air they breathed. Harlan's jaw tightened. He had seen men crushed in boardrooms, but never so openly, so casually in front of customers, in front of strangers. The boy whispered an apology, but it dissolved under the manager's glare. He returned to work smaller than before, as though his spine had been broken without touch. And still the night was not finished with its cruelties. Later, Harlan was handed a tray, told to serve. He carried it slowly, weaving between tables crowded with impatient hands. A shove from behind nearly toppled him, a drink spilling down his sleeve. Murmurs rose, snickers, complaints. He steadied himself, jaw clenched, but Joran's voice cut through the noise. "Move faster. Old man customers don't have all night." The words landed heavy, stripping even the disguise of its dignity. Harlan pressed on tray, trembling until he reached the table. Another push, another laugh. He caught the edge, saved the meal from falling, and breathed hard through the weight of humiliation. When he returned, Joran's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of it, old man," he hissed, as if Harlan's mere existence was an offense. The words lingered cold and sharp, a hook pulled tighter into his chest. The clock above the counter ticked mercilessly. A young worker burst through the door, breathless cheeks flushed from running. He had missed the start of his shift by 2 minutes. Only 2. His apology spilled out before he could catch his breath. Joran stood waiting, arms folded, jaw set like stone. "You're late," he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. The boy tried to explain traffic, a broken bus, the sprint to arrive. None of it mattered. "You're done here," Joran declared. No warning, no second chance. The words struck harder than a fist. The worker's eyes widened, lips trembling. "Please, just 2 minutes," he whispered, but the manager had already turned away. 2 minutes of lateness erased weeks of labor, nights of exhaustion, the effort of someone clinging to a wage too small to live on. The paradox was cruel. The company bled money from waste and arrogance, yet cut down a boy for seconds on a clock. Harlan watched the unfairness carved deep into him. This was not management. This was tyranny measured in minutes. Not long after, a sound broke through the thud of a body against tile. An elderly man had fallen near the corner table, his groceries scattered like spilled secrets. The room froze for a moment, then shifted into avoidance, eyes turning away. But Marvella moved. Without hesitation, she knelt, gathering oranges that rolled under chairs, lifting the man gently with hands steady despite the rush of orders around her. She smiled, speaking softly, though her words were drowned by the din. She brushed dust from his coat as if it mattered more than the time ticking against her shift. The man's eyes watered gratitude, unspoken yet fierce. Around them, silence grew heavier, shame pressing into those who had done nothing. Harlan watched. After cruelty, here was defiance not in protest, but in kindness. A small act, yet sharp enough to pierce the ugliness he had seen. Hope, faint but real, flickered in that kneel. Later, as the evening dragged on, Harlan stood near the counter again. Elwood caught his eye and smirked. He leaned forward, voice dripping disdain. "Why do you even eat here?" The words cut deeper than the first insult, not aimed at the fries this time, but at his very presence, as if Harlan's existence was unworthy of space of food, of breath in that room. Customers nearby chuckled, the sound low but sharp, feeding the contempt like dry wood to fire. Harlan held the tray tighter, feeling the burn of humiliation coil through his chest. This was more than impatience. It was hatred of weakness, hatred of anyone who appeared small. Elwood's sneer was a mirror of every face that had once laughed at Harlan's shoes, his hunger, his silence. The contempt was no longer casual. It was deliberate, open poisonous. And Harlan knew this was the rot laid bare. In the brief pause between rushes, Thad leaned close, his voice low enough to stay hidden under the hum of the fryer. "You know what stings most?" he asked. His hands never stopped moving, scrubbing a tray until his knuckles whitened. "The tips. We earn them, but we never see them." Harlan frowned, silent, letting the man continue. "They disappear. Joran says it's for maintenance, or for the drawer being short. But it's a lie. He pockets it. Every dollar. I work 2 jobs, chase hours until my body breaks, and still he takes what's left." Thad's eyes burned, not with tears, but with a kind of quiet fury. "My kids ask why I'm never home. I tell them it's because I'm trying. But I can't tell them someone steals the crumbs off my plate. The injustice was wider than lateness, sharper than insults. It was theft disguised as authority." Harlan felt his chest tighten, anger climbing step by step, no longer pity, but rage. Later that night, the schedule board glared with inked names. Joran pointed to it, his tone ironclad. "You stay. Everyone stays. We're not done." A young woman protested, whispering about her child waiting at home. Joran's stare cut her down. "Leave if you want, but don't come back tomorrow." The threat hung heavier than the neon lights, more final than any dismissal. One by one, the workers bowed their heads. They stayed not from loyalty, but from fear. Hours stretched the clock, climbing deeper into night, yet the promise of extra pay never came. Their time was stolen as surely as their tips. Harlan stood in the corner, watching lives bent into submission. This wasn't mismanagement. It was rot woven into the fabric, a culture that fed on silence. He thought of the contract waiting for his signature, its numbers blind to this darkness, and he knew this was only a fraction of what lay beneath. A customer's voice broke through, sharp with irritation. "Your staff has no respect," he snapped, pointing at a timid boy behind the counter. He barely looked at me. "What kind of service is this?" The boy opened his mouth, but Joran was faster. His finger jabbed toward him, eyes narrowed. "It's his fault. He's careless. I've warned him before." The lie rolled smooth, practiced a shield against accountability. The boy lowered his gaze, swallowing the blame he hadn't earned. His shoulders curled inward, shrinking as though guilt were a cloak forced over him. The customer shook his head, muttered curses, and left. But Harlan had seen it, the truth hiding in plain sight. The boy had done nothing wrong. The fault was Joran's poison, his reflex to dodge consequence by sacrificing those below him. Harlan's eyes locked on Joran's. In them he saw not authority but cowardice, the kind that thrived only in the dark. Harlan sat in the back room, the hum of the fryer muffled by walls stained with grease. He opened his notebook, the pen hovering over the page. His hand was steady, yet his chest tightened as he wrote 4 words. "Do not invest here." He stared at the ink, the letters black as judgment. $250 million once ready to breathe life into this chain now dangled on the edge of refusal. $250 million, he whispered, cannot save a culture that feeds on contempt. But he hesitated. His pen lifted, and he struck a line through the words. The page scarred but not erased, like a verdict not yet final. He leaned back, the silence pressing in his vow, echoing louder than the machinery outside. His decision felt both inevitable and unbearable. And still the story was not finished. Something waited unseen, testing the last fragments of his resolve. Later, Harlan overheard Marvella speaking to a new worker, a girl no older than 19. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the register, eyes wet with shame. Marvella leaned closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Just smile," she said, "even if it hurts. They can take your hours, they can take your tips, but don't let them take that. A smile belongs to you." The girl nodded, clinging to the words as if they were armor. Around them, the noise of the store carried on, but in that corner, something gentler took root. Harlan watched the weight of betrayal still in his chest, but here was proof that dignity could survive even in the cracks of cruelty. A small light, fragile but defiant. It wasn't much, not compared to the millions balanced in his hand, but sometimes survival itself was an act of rebellion. It came without warning. As Harlan approached the counter tray in hand, Elwood's voice rose above the crowd. "Why do you even eat here?" he jeered loud enough to draw stares. The insult wasn't just for him, it was staged a performance for the customers. Laughter rippled through the line, strangers enjoying the spectacle of an old man diminished. Harlan stood silent, his face carved from stone, while the mockery spread like fire. Elwood leaned closer, his grin wide, savoring the cruelty. "You don't belong here," he added, voice dripping venom. It was contempt made public, a humiliation designed to erase a man in front of witnesses. Harlan's grip tightened on the tray, the plastic trembling against his hands. The echo of past shames returned, but sharper, now rawer. Every insult of his youth compressed into this single moment. The air grew still. The crowd's laughter faded, leaving only the sting of Elwood's words heavy as iron. Harlan sat alone at a small metal table, the noise of the shop fading into a distant hum. He opened his notebook pages, scarred with thoughts he rarely shared. The pen moved slowly, each letter pressed into the paper like a verdict. "Do not sign." The words stared back at him, blunt and irrevocable. He read them once, twice, as though testing their weight. His chest felt lighter, almost freed, but his hands trembled slightly at the finality of it. $250 million erased by 4 words, scrawled in ink. The decision carried more than money. It carried judgment on the culture he had witnessed, contempt, theft, humiliation, decay. His resolve crystallized. Yet in the silence he wondered if the ink could truly carry such truth. He closed the book, the page folded like a sealed fate, the cliff of choice sharp and unforgiving. Moments later he reopened the notebook. The words were still there, black and heavy, but his hand hesitated. With a single motion he drew a line through them. The letters blurred, half erased, but not gone. He leaned back, staring into the distance as if the horizon might answer. His eyes caught the neon glow outside, indifferent and endless. The certainty of a moment ago dissolved into fog. Do not sign. But what if? The question hovered, gnawed. Could he abandon the workers who had shown kindness, the Marvellas, the Thads, by walking away completely? Was refusal an act of justice or of surrender? The notebook remained open, its scarred line mocking him. His decision was no longer firm. It dangled, fragile, unresolved. The air around him grew taut, like a wire stretched to breaking. One pull, one choice, and everything would collapse. Days later, the hall filled with restless voices. Employees from across the chain gathered, faces tense, some lit with hope, others dulled by exhaustion. They had been told an announcement was coming, one that could decide the company's future. Excitement buzzed through the room. Whispers of investment expansion, new chance rippled in waves. For many, it meant survival stability, perhaps a chance to breathe. They straightened uniforms, rehearsed smiles, eager to be seen. At the front chairs stood ready, the table draped with papers that looked important but empty. No one in the room knew the truth, that the man who would decide their fate had walked among them in rags, endured their contempt, witnessed their quiet dignity. Only Harlan knew. And as he waited behind closed doors, the weight of revelation pressed against him, seconds ticking louder than any applause. The hall shimmered with anticipation, but beneath it, silence sharpened into a blade. The room hushed when he stepped onto the stage. The murmur of voices died, replaced by the scrape of chairs and the collective breath of expectation. Harlan stood at the front, his disguise still clinging to him, thick glasses, the wig pressed against his scalp, the coat hanging limp. He paused. Then, with deliberate hands, he removed the glasses, set them on the table. Fingers reached up, tugging the wig away, gray strands tumbling down. His face emerged sharper, undeniable. Gasps scattered through the hall. Recognition flickered across the eyes of those who had once dismissed him, laughed at him, ordered him aside. Their silence was heavier than any shout. "My name," he said, his voice measured as Harlan. The weight of the name crashed through the room. The old man mocked for small fries was no beggar. He was the man whose pen held the fate of their world. And in that silence the walls of pretense began to crack. Papers lay ready, the contract, a promise of salvation. Harlan lowered himself into the chair, lifted the pen, and let it hover above the page. The room leaned forward, breathless. Whispers surged into cheers. "It's happening," someone muttered. Hands clapped, feet shuffled, relief spread like wildfire. Managers smiled with the confidence of victors. Employees saw visions of security hours returned, lives repaired. Harlan's expression betrayed nothing. He pressed the pen to the line ink bleeding across the paper. A flourish, a signature forming enough to ignite hope like dry tinder catching flame. The hall erupted. Laughter, applause, cries of triumph filled the air. For a moment they believed the storm had passed, the empire secured. But his eyes remained cold, detached, as if the name he wrote was a ghost already fading. The stage was set. The trap complete. Then came the sound no one expected. Paper ripping, slow, deliberate, cruel. Harlan rose, contract in hand, his signature still wet on the page. With one steady motion he tore it down the middle, the halves fluttering like fallen wings. The applause collapsed into gasps, into silence, strangled by disbelief. Faces shifted, shock first, then fear. Managers froze, eyes wide, mouths half open. Workers stared, confusion twisting into dread. Hope raised high only moments before shattered into jagged pieces. $250 million, Harlan said, voice cutting through the air, cannot buy respect. It cannot erase contempt, and it will not save this. He dropped the pieces to the floor. The sound was final, colder than any gavel. What had been a promise was now an execution. The hall still echoed with the tearing of paper when Harlan's voice struck clear and merciless. "The investment is canceled," he declared. $250 million gone. The words hit harder than any shout. Managers stiffened their faces, draining of color. Employees shifted, murmurs rising, the weight of lost promises pressing down like stone. Dreams built on numbers evaporated in an instant. Harlan's gaze swept the room. "You ask, why?" "Because what I saw cannot be fixed with money. Contempt cannot be bought into kindness. Theft cannot be painted over with profit. Respect must be lived, not purchased." The silence thickened. He had not merely withdrawn his wealth, he had stripped them bare, exposing a culture corroded from the inside. For a moment his voice was not only punishment, it was release. Justice had been spoken, and for those who had endured the sound, was almost sweet. From the corner, Elwood's bravado cracked. His lips trembled, eyes darting for escape that didn't exist. He stumbled forward, words spilling in panic. "I didn't mean it. It was a joke, just a joke." But Harlan did not flinch. His face was carved in iron, voice colder than glass. "A joke," he repeated. He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "One joke can humiliate. One joke can corrode trust. And one joke," he said, pausing, "can kill a future." Elwood shook his head, tears edging his eyes. "Please, I didn't know," but the plea found no mercy. Harlan's silence weighed heavier than any insult. The man who once mocked weakness now stood weak himself, begging before the very figure he had scorned. The reversal was complete cruel in its inevitability. Harlan's judgment had no softness. It was the blade Elwood himself had sharpened, now turned against him. Joran, sweating under the lights, stepped forward with forced confidence. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "The staff exaggerate. They don't see the whole picture. I've managed responsibly every action for the company's good." But Harlan raised a hand, stopping the flow of excuses. His eyes met those of the workers in the room. "Tell me," he said, and one by one, voices rose. Thad spoke of stolen tips, the young boy of public humiliation, the woman of hours stolen without pay. Each account layered the pattern undeniable. Joran's face paled further with every word. His protest weakened, collapsing under the weight of testimony. The lies, once his armor cracked open, leaving nothing but a hollow figure trembling under truth. The room turned no longer silent, no longer afraid. Joran's authority dissolved before their eyes, leaving him smaller, broken, exposed. Harlan's silence held the moment taut, the air electric with judgment still to come. Harlan's gaze shifted through the crowd and stopped on Marvella. Her uniform was faded, her hair pulled back, but her dignity shone brighter than the lights above them. She had carried kindness in silence, steady as stone, while cruelty stormed around her. He called her forward. The room stirred, whispers rising uncertain. Marvella stepped carefully, unsure of why she had been chosen, her hands tightening against her sides. "You," Harlan said, voice low but clear. "I saw you when no one else did. You bent down to lift a man who had fallen. You paid from your own pocket for a stranger's meal. In a place filled with contempt, you chose decency." Her eyes widened. For that, he continued, "I am granting you a full scholarship. You will train as a manager not because of profit, but because of character." Marvella's lips parted, trembling, unable to speak. Tears welled, spilling against the silence. Around her, heads turned, and for the first time admiration outweighed fear. A twist no one expected reward, not for power, but for quiet kindness. Next, Harlan called Thad. The man stepped forward, slowly weary lines etched into his face. He expected nothing. His shoulders bowed under years of disappointment. But Harlan's words cut through the weight. "You work 2 jobs, sacrifice hours with your children, and still your pay is stolen. You should not bear that burden alone." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he said it. "Your debts are cleared. Every cent. From this moment, you are free." Thad froze as if the words were too large to fit inside him. Slowly, his breath broke into a laugh, then a sob. "This changes everything," he whispered, his voice cracking. The room, once hostile, now stirred with awe. Workers glanced at one another, hope sparking where despair had ruled. For the first time in years, Thad stood taller, the weight lifting from his back. It was not charity. It was justice long overdue. Finally, Harlan faced them all. His voice carried not anger now, but a gravity that demanded attention. "This company is broken," he said, "but not all of you are. Some of you still hold what money cannot buy." He let the words settle before continuing. "For those who prove themselves through integrity, through service, through respect, I am creating a fund. $5 million reserved only for those who embody dignity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For years they had labored under shadows, unseen, unrewarded. Now the possibility of recognition glimmered like a distant dawn. This fund will train, support, and raise up those who deserve to lead. It will not save the corrupt. It will not protect the cruel. It will build a future for those who refuse to bow to contempt. The promise struck deep. The system itself would bend, no longer ruled by fear alone. And for the first time the workers dared to hope. Marvella stood frozen as the words sank in. For a moment, disbelief held her still. Then the dam inside her broke. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders trembling as sobs escaped her. It was not sorrow, but something sharper, joy so unexpected it carved through years of silence. All her nights of double shifts, the insults swallowed the quiet dignity she had carried. Suddenly they had meaning. No one had ever rewarded her for kindness before. No one had ever seen it as strength. But now, before the entire company, her humanity had been acknowledged. Around her, workers watched in silence, some with their own eyes, wet others with lips pressed tight to contain the surge of feeling. In her tears, they saw themselves, every unspoken sacrifice, every gesture ignored. Harlan's gaze lingered steady. This was the release he had promised, not in numbers, but in recognition. Thad left the hall with shaking hands, fumbling for his phone as if the weight of it might vanish if he delayed. He dialed quickly, breath caught in his throat. When a small voice answered, the tightness broke. "Daddy did it," he whispered, his words splintering under emotion. Silence followed then, the burst of a child's laughter, pure, unguarded, the kind that carries hope without effort. He pressed the phone, close eyes wet. "No more bills, no more nights. I'm gone. I can be there. I can be home." His voice cracked, but it was steadier than it had been in years. For Thad, freedom was not wealth, but time. Time to sit at a table with his children, time to rest without shame. And in that single phrase, Daddy did it, the years of struggle bent into something new, a future worth living. Elwood did not plead again. His voice had already failed him, his excuses torn apart. Now, as the hall shifted around him, cheers, whispers, tears, he lowered his head. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he stepped back. His shoulders sagged, the swagger drained. The smirk that once ruled his lips was gone, replaced by a hollow mask. He turned, walking toward the door. No one stopped him. No one called his name. Harlan watched the retreat, noting the collapse in each step. Elwood had built his power on ridicule, on the weakness of others. But stripped of that stage, he was nothing. His shadow shrank under the lights, his figure bent, diminished. The man who had mocked for sport now carried the weight of his own disgrace. His silence was louder than his insults had ever been, and as he disappeared through the exit, his fall was complete. Joran stood frozen as the verdict fell, suspended, stripped of authority. No protest left his lips. He remained still, rigid as stone, but his silence betrayed the truth. The man who barked orders now stared at the floor, his power dissolved like smoke. Workers watched without pity. His kingdom had always been hollow, built on fear, and in a single stroke it collapsed. The hall no longer belonged to him. He was there, yet already gone, a statue carved from arrogance, abandoned to dust. Harlan stood apart, his voice low, but it carried through the hall. One small box of fries, he said, was enough to strip away the mask of this place. Enough to expose pride, cruelty, and also kindness. A handful of salt and potatoes revealed a soul. He paused, the weight of silence pressing in. Never forget what seems small can uncover everything. A heart, a culture, a future. His words lingered not as judgment, but as a mirror. This is only the beginning. Kindness will be tested again in darker rooms, in harsher hours. Power can humiliate, money can corrupt, but dignity remains the one wealth no one can steal. Remember this: every act of respect shapes the future more than contracts or millions. And now it is your turn. Have you ever been dismissed, belittled, made to feel small? Tell your story. Speak it aloud. Share it. Because when we refuse silence, when we choose to stand, even the smallest voice can topple contempt.